Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Request everyone to come inside. Now we're starting our regular Ramadan lecture program. Starting with Hazir Kisab with Chaman Bhai. Ba'adu bilan salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.
I'm good. Thank you. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم عن جابر بن عبد الله الأنصاري عن فاطمة الزهراء عليه السلام بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله قال سمعت فاطمة أنها قالت دخل على أبي رسول الله في بعض الأيام فقال السلام عليك يا فاطمة فقلت عليك السلام قال إني أجد في بدني ضعفا فقلت له أعيذك بالله يا أبتاه من الضعف فقال يا فاطمة ائتني بالكساء اليماني فغطيني به فأتيته بالكساء اليماني فغطيته به وصرت أنظر عليه وإذا وجهه يتلألأ كأنه البدر في ليلة تمامه وكماله صلى الله محمد وآل محمد فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسن قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أماه فقلت عليك السلام يا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال يا أماه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله فقلت نعم إن جدك تحت الكساء طلع محمد وآل محمد فأقبل الحسن نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جداه يا رسول الله أتعذنني أن ندخل معك تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب حوزي قد أذنت لك فدخل معه تحت الكساء فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسين قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أمه فقلت وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال لي يا أمه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله فقلت نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء فدني الحسين نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جداه والسلام عليك يا من اختاره الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكما تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي قد أذنت لك فدخل معهما تحت الكساء فأقبل عند ذلك باب الحسن علي بن أبي طالب اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله فقلت وعليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن أمي رسول الله فقلت نعم ها هو ما ولديك تحت الكساء فأقبل العلي نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال له عليك السلام يا أخي ويا وسي وخليفتي وصاحب لواعي قد أذنت لك فدخل علي تحت الكساء ثم أتيت تحت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بذتي قد أذنت لك فدخلت تحت الكساء فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ برسول الله بتر في الكساء وأمي بعد اليمن إلى السماء وقال اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحمتي لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم अना हरबन लिमन हारबहुम व सिलमन लिमन सालमहुम व दुओ लिमन आदाहुम व मुहिब्बो लिमन अहब्बहुम इन्नहुम मिन्नी व अना मिनहुम फाजल सलवातिका व बरकातिका व रहमतिका व गुफ़रानिका व रिज़वानिका अलैया व अलैहिम वाज़िब अनहुम रिज्सा व ताहरहुम तत्हीरा लिल्लाह मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद। फ़क़ाल अल्लाहु अज़्ज़ा व जल या मलाइकती व सुक्कान समावाती इन्नी मा खलक़्तु समाअन मबनिया वला अर्ज़न मदहिया वला क़मरन मुनीरा वला शम्सन मुज़िया वला फ़ल्कन यदूर वला बहरन यजरी वला फ़ुल्कन यसरी इल्ला फ़ी मोहब्बति हाउलाए ख़म्सतल लज़ीना हुम तहतल किसा। फ़क़ाल अमीन जिब्राईल या रब्बि वमन तहतल किसा। फ़क़ाल अज़्ज़ा व जल हुम अहबतुन नबुव्वा व मादनुर रिसाला हुम फ़ातिमतु व अबूहा व बालुहा व बनूहा। फ़क़ाल जिब्राईल या रब्बि ताज़ुन लि अन अहबत इलल अर्ज़ लियकुन मअहुम सादिसन। फ़क़ाल अल्लाहु नअम क़द अज़नतु लक फ़अहबतल अमीन जिब्राईल वक़ाल अस्सलामु अलैका या रसूलल्लाह अललियुल आला युक़रिउका अस्सलाम व युख़स्सिका बिल तहियति वल इकराम व यक़ूलु लक व इज़्ज़ती व जलाली इन्नी मा खलक़्तु समाअन मबनिया वला अर्ज़न मदहिया वला क़मरन मुनीरा वला शम्सन मुज़िया वला फ़ल्कन यदूर वला बहरन यजरी वला फ़ुल्कन यसरी इल्ला लिअजलिकुम व मुहब्बतिकुम व क़द अज़्न ली अन अदख़ुला मअकुम फ़हल ताज़िन ली या रसूलल्लाह। फ़क़ाल रसूलुल्लाह व अलैकुस्सलाम या अमीन वही अल्लाह इन्नहु नाम क़द अज़नतु लक फ़दख़ल जिब्राईल मअना तहतल किसा। फ़क़ाल लि अबी इन्नल्लाह क़द ऊहा अलैकुम यक़ूल इन्नमा युरीदुल्लाहु लियुज़हिबा अन्कुम अर्रिज्सा अहलल बैत व युतahhirakum तत्हीरा। सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम। फ़क़ाल अली व अबी या रसूलल्लाह अख़बरनी मा लिजुलूसिना हाज़ा तहतल किसा मिनल फ़ज़्ल इंदल्लाह। फ़क़ाल अन्नबी वल्लज़ी बअसनी बिलहक़्क़ि नबिय्यन व इस्तिफ़ानी बिर्रिसालति नजिय्यन मा ज़ुकिरा ख़बरुना हाज़ा फ़ी महफ़िलिन मिन महाफ़िल अहलिल अर्ज़ व फ़ीहि जमउन मिन शियतिना व मुहिब्बीना इल्ला व नज़्ज़लत लहु अलैहिमुर रहमा व हफ़्फ़त बिहुमुल मलाइकतु व इस्तग़फ़रत लहुम इला अन यतफ़र्रक़ू। फ़क़ाल अली नज़्ज़मल्लाहु फ़ुज़ना व फ़ात शियतुना व रब्बिल काबा। फ़क़ाल अन्नबी सानियन या अली वल्लज़ी बअसनी बिलहक़्क़ि नबिय्यन व इस्तिफ़ानी बिर्रिसालति नजिय्यन मा ज़ुकिरा ख़बरुना हाज़ा फ़ी महफ़िलिन मिन महाफ़िल अहलिल अर्ज़ व फ़ीहि जमउन मिन शियतिना व मुहिब्बीना व फ़ीहिम महमूमुन इल्ला व फ़रजल्लाहु ग़म्मा वला मग़मूमुन इल्ला व कशफ़ल्लाहु ग़म्महु वला तालिबतुल हाजतु इल्ला व क़ज़ियल्लाहु हाजतह। फ़क़ाल अलियुन इज़न वल्लाहु फ़ुज़ना व सुइदना व कज़ालिका शियतना फ़ाज़ू व सुइदु फ़िद्दुनिया वल आख़िरति व रब्बिल काबा। सलाम है पढ़ें 5 मिनट के लिए। रमज़ानुल मुबारक के बस चंद रोज़ बाकी हैं तो एक सलाम है मेरे हाथ में। रमज़ान को अल्लाह ताला कहता है कि मेरा महीना है और ऑफ़ कोर्स इसमें कुरान नाज़िल हुआ है तो ये कुरान का भी महीना है, लेकिन हम शिया जो हैं हम इसको कहते हैं अली का भी महीना है क्योंकि इसमें मौला हमसे रुख़सत हुए तो इमाम अली की शान में है। क्या मेरे लब पे तो रहता है सुबह मसा, मेरे लब पे तो रहता है सुबह मसा, या अली या अली या अली या अली। बंदा परवर यही है वजीफ़ा मेरा, बंदा परवर यही है वजीफ़ा मेरा, या अली या अली या अली या अली। आप माने न माने हकीकत है ये, खुद असर पेशवाई को आ जाएगी। देखिए कह के एक बार बादज दुआ, देखिए कह के एक बार बादज दुआ, या अली या अली या अली या अली। मेरी बारी पे जब आया मौला मेरा, नज़ा की मुश्किलें सारी आसान हुई। सर को रख के कदम पर जो मैंने कहा, सर को रख के कदम पर जो मैंने कहा, या अली या अली या अली या अली। है ज़माना मुखालिफ तो होता है क्या, मुझको मुतलक ज़माने की परवाह नहीं। सांस जब तक है बाकी कहे जाऊंगा, सांस जब तक है बाकी कहे जाऊंगा, या अली या अली या अली या अली। बाब जन्नत का जिस वक्त देखा मुझे, रास्ता दे दिया हट के रिजवान ने। आपकी मिदह का ये मिला है सिला, या अली या अली या अली या अली। जब ये पूछा गया इसका मतलब है क्या, कुल कफा हल्लता इन्नमा ला फता। मुस्करा कर जवाबन ये मैंने कहा, या अली या अली या अली या अली। आप क्या हैं हकीकत है क्या आपकी, खुद मशीयत कभी है इशारा यही। मुस्तफ़ा को भी मुश्किल में कहना पड़ा, मुश्किल मुस्तफ़ा को भी मुश्किल में कहना पड़ा, या अली या अली या अली या अली। आखिरी इसका बंद है। विर्द करने लगा मैं जो नादे अली, भूल बैठे फरिश्ते जो था पूछना। वो भी कहने लगे मैं भी कहने लगा, वो भी कहने लगे मैं भी कहने लगा, या अली या अली या अली या अली। सलवात भेजे मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद के नाम पर। सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम। शुक्रिया।
Jazakallah Chaman Bhai. Now we're requesting Qibla Talim Moosvi for his series of lecture for 27th of Ramadan in Jafaria, Connecticut. Bawaz Buland Salwat.
Please, brothers and sisters, before we begin, recite Surah Fatiha for your manhumeen and for the manhumeen of all of those that provided for tonight's iftar. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفرهم وارحمهم واسكنهم بجوار محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعمه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون، الذي لا يدركه بهد الهمم ولا يناله غوث الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت محدود ولا أجل ممدود فترى الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بالسخر ميدان أرض ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وحبيبنا وحبيب رب العالمين بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعن على أعدائهم أجمعين من أول يوم ظلمهم إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد فقال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المبين وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وأنكحوا الأيام منكم والصالحين من عبادكم وإمائكم إن يكونوا فقراء يغنيهم الله من فضله والله واسع عليم صدق الله العلي العظيم. One of the recognized commandments of Islam is this commandment of marriage. And when it comes to marriage, the Holy Prophet, one of the narrations of the Holy Prophet is, he says that this marriage is one of my sunnats, and anyone that does not do the sunnat is not from me. Meaning that anyone that does not engage in the sunnat of marriage, they are not considered to be Muslim. So when it comes to this marriage, within Islam and amongst Islamic communities, culture is one thing, Islam is one thing. What do I mean? Muslims, they live in America. Muslims, they live in Pakistan. Muslims, they live in America. Muslims, they live in any of the Arab countries, correct? Culture has an effect on an individual. The way marriage is practiced in this culture is different from the way marriage is practiced in some of the cultures that we come from, meaning India, Pakistan, Arab, whatever it is. The problem that the youngsters have that are living in the West is that their perception of marriage, it clashes with the perception that the parents have of marriage. Because the youngsters, they've grown up here in this society, their perception of marriage is what the Western society has said. Because the parents have grown up in an Islamic country where the culture and Islam, they were together, their perception of marriage is the same that is in that country. Now, when they immigrate from those Islamic countries, they immigrate to the West, now it becomes a problem between the youngsters and the elders. It becomes a problem between the children and the parents. But in reality, it doesn't need to be a problem. There doesn't need to be a problem. Because you have to remember that Islam says as long as the culture is not doing something that is un-Islamic, you can take from that culture. You can take from that culture. As long as it's not doing something that is un-Islamic. So when it comes to marriage, there's some things that are un-Islamic in this culture, and there's some things that are un-Islamic in that culture. Correct? As long as they don't clash against the commandments of Islam, you can take from both cultures. What do I mean? For example, in the culture that many of us come from, one thing that they do is that as soon as someone's born, they say this person is going to marry that person, that's it. And some people are shaking their heads because they know what exactly I'm talking about. So they come from that culture. That is un-Islamic. That's un-Islamic. Here in this culture, the bounds of Islam are exceeded when it comes to getting to know who you're going to marry. In that culture, the bounds don't exist in the sense that they don't even want those bounds to exist. What do I mean? Islam, it says a potential wife, a potential husband has the right to see each other and speak to each other. Has the right. Islam says that. The culture over here says, okay, you know what? We don't have a problem with that. The culture that most of us come from, there is a problem. So what happens? The parents, they come from that culture where it says, no, the potential husband and wife to be, they cannot see each other, they cannot talk to each other. No, we've already decided they're going to get married. when in reality that's not Islam. If you all remember, when Amir al-Mu'mineen went, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad, when Amir al-Mu'mineen went to ask for Lady Zahra's hand in marriage, there were many people that came to the Holy Prophet before, correct? The Holy Prophet, he said no to them, no to them, no to them. He didn't even bother going and asking Lady Zahra. He said no to them. When Amir al-Mu'mineen came, what does the Holy Prophet say? He said, Ya Ali, can you wait? Let me go ask what my daughter thinks. Who has come to ask for Lady Zahra's hand in marriage? Amir al-Mu'mineen. There's no one that sacrificed more for Islam than Amir al-Mu'mineen. Correct? There's no one that has protected the Holy Prophet. There's no one that has believed in the Holy Prophet more than Amir al-Mu'mineen. Yet when this individual comes, the Holy Prophet says, Ya Ali, let me go ask my daughter. Let me go ask my daughter. This is something for a lot of the elders to learn from. It doesn't matter what service this individual has done for Islam. No, it doesn't matter. But when it comes for marriage, if a servant, even such as Amir al-Mu'mineen, comes to ask for the hand of the daughter of Rasulullah, the Rasulullah is going to say what? Ya Ali, I know all the services that you've done for Islam, but at the same time, this is a right that my daughter has that I go and ask her. This is a right that my daughter has that I go. When the Holy Prophet is asking his daughter, what gives parents such as us the right not to even ask our daughter and just say, no, you're going to marry him? And this happens in the culture that you and I come from, which is un-Islamic, which is haram. Yet people are engaged in it. The youngsters, what they have to remember and what they have to realize is not everything in this culture is to be taken in. Why? When it comes to marriage, like I said before, the bounds are exceeded. The bounds, they become exceeded in the sense that people are dating, correct? In Islam, there is no dating. Dating is haram. It's considered zina. That's it. End of story. They date, they get to know each other that way, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year. And there's no marriage that comes out of it. Why is dating, and now that this topic, why is dating haram in Islam? Because neither the man or the woman, they don't have any rights. Neither of them have any rights. When it comes to marriage, both the male and the female, they both have rights. When it comes to dating, there's no rights. Do whatever you want, that's it. Islam gives rights to every single individual. Every single individual. The laws of Islam, they're created in a way that the right of another person is not taken from them. That the right of another person is not taken from them. So when it comes to this aspect of marriage or wanting to marry in the West where they're dating, it's actually taking rights away from individuals. That's one of the reasons Islam says that this type of mingling, even for the sake of marriage, is haram. Because there's no rights there. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran, which I started this lecture off with? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَنْكِلْ ayama, and marry the single people amongst yourselves, the righteous servants, the righteous slaves. If you are poor, this is what I want to talk about. If you are poor, what will happen? The verse of the Quran says, if you are poor, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you rich. If you are poor, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enrich you. What do a lot of the Muslims do? They're poor, no problem. I'm going to get married when? After I finish my studies. They finish their studies. I'm going to get married when? Now that I have a house. They find a house. Or when I have a car. They get a car. They find a house. By that time, how old are they? 30, 35? And they've spent so much time committing sin. They spent so much time committing sin. Why? Because they were looking for those means. They were looking for that mean of enrichment. When in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that marriage is a mean of enrichment. Marriage is a means of enrichment. When the wife comes, she brings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides for every single creation that He's created. So when the wife comes, what's her due right by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He brings that to this house. She brings that to this house. What is one of the reasons that marriage has been considered to be almost, I'm not going to say wajib, because none of the maraja that have said wajib, there's no narration that says that it is wajib in that sense, like the way namaz is wajib. No. Sunnat-e-ta'kidi, in the sense that it's so close to not doing it that it could be considered haram. But I'm not going to say that it's wajib. But for some people, it does become wajib. Marriage does become wajib for some people. Just the same way for some people, divorce becomes wajib. And I know this word divorce people don't like to hear, but no, sometimes divorce ends up becoming wajib for certain individuals. And sometimes marriage becomes wajib for certain individuals. Marriage becomes wajib for who? Marriage becomes wajib for those individuals that are constantly in fear of committing something haram. Or those individuals that are already engaged in something that is haram. It becomes wajib for them to marry. Why? So they stop engaging in that. What is the most famous saying about marriage? As soon as an individual marries, what has he done for his iman? He's protected half of his iman. Famous narration about marriage. As soon as an individual gets married, he's protected half of his iman. Meaning what? Just by this marriage, the barakat of the wife is that she has what? Done what to this person? She has helped protect half of this person's iman. Just by the marriage. Now the other half of the iman, it's that individual's duty to work on it. It's that individual's duty to work on it. But this is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says half your iman will be saved as soon as you get married. So this is one way to thank your spouse for saving that, especially the men. Especially the men. That half your iman has been saved. But what do a lot of us do? We prolong this getting married. Sometimes it's the children. Sometimes it's the parents. The children, they're ready to get married. There might be 20, there might be 21, they might still be in university, but they are mentally and physically ready to get married. The parents say no. The parents say no. If those youngsters who are mentally prepared to get married, and they can financially support themselves to an extent, if they were to commit something haram, whose shoulders does that haram act on? Parents. Why? Because it's the parents that are preventing them. And these cases have happened where parents, they say no. What do? They run off. If they run off and they do something haram, whose fault is that? The parents. On the Day of Judgment, the parents will be asked, your children, they were ready for marriage. You said no. Why did you say no? Ya Allah, this person, I didn't think they were worthy of my daughter. They weren't making enough money. They weren't making enough money. And this has happened too, where the parents of the daughter, they say no. Why? Because the groom-to-be is not making enough money. And as you're all aware that a bride, she needs the permission of her guardian. Whoever, if her guardian is her father, she needs his permission. If the grandfather, she needs his permission. There are instances where the guardians, they say no. The gentleman, when it comes to Iman, when it comes to Islam, practicing Muslim, but because they doesn't make enough money, they say no, he doesn't make enough money. He doesn't make enough money. There's some instances where the girl does not need to listen to the parents when it comes to marriage. And this is one of those instances where if the parents want the girl to marry someone that is wealthy but has no iman, has no religion to them, but the girl herself, she wants to marry someone that has iman, alaykum salam, that practices religion, but he's not wealthy, the shar, it says that the girl does not need to listen to the parent. She can do it of her own accord. She can do it of her own accord. Why? Because Islam is looking at the religion. It's not looking at finances. Why? Because finances, they come and go. Today the person's poor, tomorrow they'll be rich. Today they're rich, tomorrow they'll be poor. Because these financial situations, they continue to change. Not just month to month, not just year to year, sometimes from day to day. When it comes to iman, iman doesn't change day to day. It might take years for iman to change, for example. It might take years. But what do a lot of Muslims do? No, they don't make enough money. What do some people do? Oh, they're not the same class as us. They're not the same class as us. Where did this come from, that they're not the same class as us? This isn't within Islam. This is why I said there's some things that are cultural that are un-Islamic. You and I need to figure out what's actually cultural, so if it's against some of the commandments of Islam, we leave them aside. Some people, they look at Islam, they say marriage, okay, Islam, the Holy Prophet, he married a young girl. Even though in our narration they say that Aisha was not that age. We have narrations that say that she was over 20, 25 years of age when even she was married to the Holy Prophet. But the Sunnis, they have narrations that say that she was 9, 10, 11, whatever the case is. Correct? Here in the society that you all live in, and they look at this and they say, you know, what kind of prophet is this? He's marrying someone that is that young. He's marrying someone that's that young. What kind of prophet is this? And they start accusing the prophet. You have to remember that in the society that you and I live in, what's the minimum age for marriage? Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. 18, right? No. There's some states where with the permission of the state, a girl can get married at the age of 12. With the permission of the state, a girl can marry at the age of 12. Those laws still exist in some of the states. At 12. So who's going to decide? 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old. This society that we live in today says that a 12-year-old can get married. That society, that's in another part of the world, that existed 1400 years ago. It said that, okay, you know what, it's okay for a 9-year-old to get married. So what right does this society, the people of this living in this society 1400 years later, have to accuse the people that were living 1400 years before in a completely different society of doing something that is unnatural? There's no right. Today, like I said, with the permission of the state, a 12-year-old girl can get married. It's legal. If a 40-year-old marries a 12-year-old, if a 40-year-old marries a 12-year-old, 1400 years from today, if the people look back at this marriage, do they have a right to point a finger at this marriage and say, what kind of marriage was this? No, why? Because in the society we live in the time period that we live in, the people consider it to be okay. If 1400 years from now, that society says, no, that's not okay, then that's fine. It's not okay for them at that time period. 1400 years from them, they'll look at that society and say, hey, you know what is this? What's going on here? If the human lifespan continues to increase, 1400 years from now, that society says, no, that's not okay, then that's fine. It's not okay for them at that time period. 1400 years from them, they'll look at that society and say, hey, you know what is this? What's going on here? If the human lifespan continues to increase, 1400 years from now, that society says, no, that's not okay, then that's fine. It's not okay for them at that time period. 1400 years from them, they'll look at that society and say, hey, you know what is this? What's going on here? If And people are living 200, 300 years. In the narrations, that's what they say. When the rujat happens, mu'mineen will be living almost 500 years. And you see that medicine does not say no, mu'mineen cannot live that long. In fact, medicine, what has it been doing? It's been increasing lifespan of a human individual. So if 2,000 years from now, if those individuals then are 200 years, 300 years, 400 years, if a 400-year-old decides to marry, for example, a 100-year-old, in this society, in this age, we think that's absurd. But in that society where 500 years, they're living up to 500 years, 600 years, that might be normal. Do you see where optics plays? So we don't have a right to question that society or raise our finger against that society. Why? Because this age constantly changes. But what doesn't change? What doesn't change regardless of age? That mental maturity will not change. Meaning that mental maturity can occur in an individual when they're 9. That mental maturity can occur in an individual when they're 30. It can occur in an individual when they're 100. Islam, they're not just looking at the physical maturity. Islam is also looking at mental maturity. Mental maturity. If you're physically mature, but you're mentally not mature or prepared to start a marriage, Islam says no, they can't get married. They're not mentally prepared to start a marriage. So what does that mean? You have an 18-year-old, the society that we live in. You have an 18-year-old physically ready for marriage. But what does the society say about teenagers? They're not mentally mature yet. They're still maturing. So if they're not mentally mature to get married, then Islam says that they don't get married because they're not ready for the responsibilities of marriage. They're not ready to give each person that right. 2, physical maturity. Depending on the place that you live, it occurs at different ages. Where science says that if you live in warmer weather, girls that live in warmer weather, they physically become mature faster than girls that are living in colder weather. This is what the scientists are saying. So that physical maturity even depends on the region that you're living in, the weather type that you're used to. So someone, for example, that's living in Africa, in Arabia, in Iraq, in Iran, in those hotter climates, they could physically become mature faster than someone that is living in colder climates. So when you have all of these optics, when you have all of this going into a marriage, Saudi Arabia, tell me, is it a hot country or is it a cold country? Hot. So that would mean what? That the girls that are there, the women that are there, they're maturing faster than women that are in colder climates. So if they're physically maturing faster, and mentally also capable of, why should age be a restriction? Why should age be a restriction? If someone at 15 is physically and mentally prepared to get married, even for someone at 15, there's no problem with money. Now you have teenagers that become millionaires. If they're physically ready to get married, mentally ready to get married, and they can provide, should they be prevented from getting married? They shouldn't be prevented from getting married. But because they're 15, what's happening? In the society that we're living in, they're considered to be underage. Islam says, no, this is cruel to individuals. If they're completely ready to get married, then allow them to get married. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He says, and let those who cannot find someone to marry, let them maintain chastity. Let them maintain chastity until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes them rich. And a lot of people, they've taken this verse of the Quran and they've said, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you shouldn't get married until you have money. No, that's not what the verse is saying. The verse is saying that if you cannot find someone, then you don't commit any haram act. If you cannot find someone, then wait until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finds someone and He enriches you. Enrichment here is through marriage, not riches, not money. Wait until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finds someone for you. Not wait until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you money and then marry. No. But what do a lot of people do? They use this verse and they say, look, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. He's telling us not to get married if we're poor. Not to get married if we're poor. Wait until we're rich and then get married. Do you see how misinterpretation of the verse is being used? Mistranslation of the verse is being used to do something that is against the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you see that this happens a lot of times. For example, when it comes to hijab, inshallah, maybe we'll talk about hijab, the hijab of men and hijab of women before I leave. I know I have maybe 2 more lectures left. If Eid is on Wednesday, then 2 more. If not, then I still have 2 more lectures because I leave on Wednesday anyways. So before, inshallah, we talk about hijab. Hijab of men, hijab of women. When it comes to hijab, everyone's focused on the hijab of women. And which is true, that hijab also needs to be put some light on that type of hijab. But the hijab of men, what is that hijab of men? Lowering your gaze, that's not it. There's more than that. When it comes to lowering your gaze, men and women are equal. When it comes to hiding your private parts, men and women are equal. The Quran, it commands men and women to do the same thing. When it comes to lowering the gaze and hiding the private parts, there's no difference between men and women there. What does it mean to lower your gaze? What does it mean if you just lower your gaze, you hide your private? Is that enough? Hijab, inshallah, we'll talk about it, but hijab, it means to cover. It means to cover. Cover what? It's different for men and for women. It's different for men and for women. And I've gone to so many masajid where the youngsters, they're praying, but their privates aren't covered. It's the first of the month of Ramadan and there's a full moon in the mosque. Yes, the youngsters know exactly what I'm talking about. Not just one, there might be 4 or 5 full moons. Is that covering? No, it's not. When we focus on hijab, we're more focused. The men, they're more focused on the women, but they're not focused on themselves. They're not focused on themselves. When in reality, they both have to be focused. When the woman is not properly in hijab, yes, it becomes the duty of the man to say, hey, you're not in proper hijab. When the man is not in proper hijab, she also has the right to say, you're not in proper hijab. When it comes to husband and wife, they're for themselves, for each other, not for others to look and gawk at. For each other. So it goes both ways. When it comes to marriage, what the ulama suggest and what the ulama do back in Iran, Iraq, how old do you think they are when they get married? I heard a number. 20s? 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 6. Thank you so much. They get married at an early age. Even today. Even today. Why? Because they know the consequences. They know they actually have fear of zina. Because of that, they get married at an early age. Even today. The more you understand the religion, the more you want to practice it. And the more you end up becoming afraid of what? Afraid of the consequences of committing certain sins. Certain sins. And because of that, the ulama, they end up marrying at an early age. Whereas the awam, they wait until they're all rich. They wait until they're all educated. The ulama, they don't look at that. They don't look at money, whether or not it's coming into their pocket. Why? Because they trust in Allah. They trust in the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, you get married, I will enrich you. Learn that from the ulama. If the kids are ready to get married, marry them off. Marry them off. Well, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, just like yesterday, I need to deal with some questions that were brought to me yesterday. One is, they were having a conversation yesterday and they asked me, can you speak about this from the member and the question and answer about zakat? Zakat is, and something about zakat and whether or not we need to give it on money. Zakat is not on money. Zakat is only and only on those things that you see in the Tawzil Masail. That's it. We do not add anything, we do not subtract anything from zakat. To the point where a companion of Imam Jafar Sadiq, he came to Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And he came to the Imam and he said, Mawla, the area that I live in, we have abundance of rice. Abundance of rice. Rice isn't one of those things that zakat is due on. So he goes, Mawla, he first asked him, what is zakat due on? And Imam, he tells him exactly what zakat is due on: the cattle, the gold, the silver, the types of food. And then the guy, he says that, Mawla, the place that we're at, there's abundance of rice. Should we give rice? Can we give rice as zakat? He says, no, zakat is only mandatory on these things. He gets angry at him. He says, do you not hear what I'm saying? He gets angry at him. Zakat, he says, zakat is only on those things which I have said. That's it. Just because it's abundant in your area doesn't matter. These have already been decided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it. Do not add anything, do not subtract anything from zakat. When it comes to our fiqh, there is no zakat on money. In Sunnis, they say that yes, there's zakat to be given on the money that you have. But when it comes to Shaykh Islam, they say no, there's no zakat on money. And even when it comes to gold and silver, the zakat is in the form of what? Coins. In the form of coins. That was one. Another thing that I was asked to talk about was amal for the 27th of Ramadan. There are amal for the 27th of Ramadan. You can do them. There's no problem. The only thing is that whether or not the 27th of Ramadan is considered to be Shab Qadr. That's where the issue is between us and the Sunnis. But when it comes to the last 10 days of the month of Ramadan, if you open up the Mafati, there's amals for each and every single day. There's amal for each and every single day. One of the amal for the last 10 days was i'tikaf. I'tikaf, it happens where? In a masjid. You can do those in any of those days. So there are amal. And if you want to do amal, you can do amal. That was the only, and I believe these were the two things that they asked me to speak from the minbar. Does anyone have any questions before we leave for Salat al-Maghrib? No questions? Then I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our sins. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive the sins of all of those marhumin, mu'mineen, mu'minat that do not have anyone to ask for forgiveness. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the rear prince of Imam Zaman. Let us, our families, be able to sacrifice our life for him and his cause. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Please once again recite Surah Fatiha for your marhumin and for the marhumin of all of those that provided for tonight's iftar. Bismillah. اللهم اغفرهم وارحمهم واسكنهم بجوار محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على